Hello and Happy New Year to everyone in the element14 communities. I'm Gough and today I'll be looking at the Raspberry Pi XBMC Home Theatre bundle. So maybe you've got an older non-smart TV sitting at home and it's not getting much use. Maybe you find broadcast TV is boring and you've got a nice media library on a USB storage device or on a network storage device, but you just can't find a way to enjoy it. Now, prior to the XBMC kit, there were basically two extremes. One extreme was to go out and build yourself a home theatre PC. This is a bit of a laborious job and it's fairly expensive because you have to configure it, you have to make sure the interface is something acceptable to you, you have to choose the right components to make sure they don't overheat, that they're quiet, that they look good, maybe that your wife likes it in the living room, and to make sure it's got the right connectivity to your TV. The other thing is it uses quite a bit of power, so it's not something that's easy to do and that everyone could achieve. But in reward, you get something that's extremely flexible, that plays almost every sort of codec you'd like, and yeah, you can do almost anything with it because it is a PC. On the other side of the extreme, you have a much lower cost, dedicated media centers. These things are little units which may be attached to USB storage devices directly or maybe to your network and can play only a limited selection of formats and maybe a limited have maybe limited connectivity and limited quality options. So these units are fairly rigid, they're not very customizable, but they are cheap, they're low power and they're quiet. So the Raspberry Pi XBMC kit actually melds a little bit of the two together. Because the Raspberry Pi itself, if you're not already aware, is a 25 quid single board computer that was originally developed for educational purposes, but is essentially a general purpose single board computer, and it runs Linux. So it's found many different uses, from embedded software design and embedded systems to even running a media center like what we're trying to do today. It features a Broadcom 700 MHz single core CPU with video accelerated decoding for H.264 or AVC included out of the box. Now, if you also want, you can purchase keys which will enable decoding for MPEG-2 and VC1 using the accelerated cores on the CPU, and that way alleviates the CPU from being overburdened for those formats. So by running a distribution of XBMC on it, such as Raspbmc or OpenELEC, we can turn our Raspberry Pi into a media center that's extensible through the use of a plug-in interface and features wide format support. So you can play virtually everything that you might have in your media library. So let's take a quick look at the kit itself. I think this is a bit of a great kit because it's got virtually everything you need to run a media center, or even just to run your Raspberry Pi, and there's very little chance of getting disappointed. Included is a Raspberry Pi Model B single board computer. This is the preferred model because it has the Ethernet and the additional USB port. There's also a micro USB cable which allows you to plug that into the charger or power supply. Included is a power supply that has enough amps to keep the whole thing going. So try not to plug the Raspberry Pi into your TV's USB port because that might not give it enough power. Now, inside the XBMC Solutions box, we've got the QWERTY Pad, which is a wireless keyboard and trackpad combination unit. It's rechargeable and it's got a fairly nice click action, so I think you'll like using that one. 2-meter HDMI lead to hook up your Raspberry Pi to your TV, a 3-meter Ethernet lead, and also a 4GB SDHC card with XBMC already preloaded on it, which pretty much makes starting up your own media center as simple as Lego. There's a nice pictorial illustration inside the XBMC solution box which you can follow to get everything hooked up. And so the uninitiated don't need to fear because they can just basically build this within a matter of minutes. It's simpler than building IKEA furniture. Whereas the advanced users, they should be pretty happy with the flexibility that's afforded by such a kit. So you can see that piecing together your own XBMC system is not very hard at all. Now that we have all the bits and pieces all pieced together as per the diagram, the next thing you need to do is make sure you've charged your wireless keyboard and mouse, which I've done. And then it's pretty much as simple as plugging it into the TV and plugging in power. You'll see that I've put a clear Multicomp case around mine because I like to protect my Raspberry Pi, but you might want to choose a black one and cover up the LEDs with a bit of black tape just to make it less visually distracting. So let's just apply power and you can see it boot up, and we'll have a viable media center in a matter of 30 seconds. And there we are. You can see that it's been booted up. Now, using this XBMC kit is not without its own little caveats. For example, if you've got a very large media library, you might find that the kit performs a little bit more slowly compared to, say, dedicated media center or home theater PC. Part of the reason is because the CPU itself is not really a speed demon, but you can alleviate this to some extent by overclocking it. And if you overclock it within the constraints that are set by the Raspberry Pi Foundation, you will not void your warranty. So that's definitely something you might want to try. The file format support is also constrained by the CPU to some degree because codecs which are not hardware accelerated decoded will require the CPU to do the heavy lifting, and as I said earlier, the CPU itself is not exactly a speed demon. Aside from that, you'll have to be wary that, for example, if you want to use an external USB hard drive or an external USB key, that plugging those USB devices into the Raspberry Pi while it is powered on may cause it to reboot, or in the case of bus-powered hard drives, it may not be able to power it at all. So highly recommended is to buy accessories like a powered external USB hub to give you that level of connectivity. And of course, depending on how you'd like to set up your media center, you may find that you will need things like USB extension leads to get your wireless keyboard receivers close enough. As I mentioned earlier, a powered hub is a good idea. A Wi-Fi card may be necessary, especially if you don't have Ethernet handy where your TV is. And a case, surprisingly. That's probably the first thing I would get for it, just to make sure the board is protected from grubby fingers, hands and electrostatic discharge. So part of the great thing with the Raspberry Pi is that it is a single board computer, so it's very flexible. There's really no limits. You could just remove the SD card and replace it with an SD card with a different image, say with Raspbian, and start experimenting with the Raspberry Pi and convert it back to a media center when the rest of your family wants to use it as a media center. Or maybe if in the future you decide that the XBMC kit is not for you and you might want something more flexible or more powerful, it's not a dead end. The Raspberry Pi is still very useful as a embedded computer if you want to use it for things like digital signage. Maybe you want to hook it up to a RTL2832 based TV tuner and do some decoding of, say, ADSB aircraft positions, wireless electricity monitor transmissions, or maybe you'd like to run your own Tor proxy, a network storage server, a personal HTTP server, or even as a remote control device. It is very handy and you can use it like a supercharged Arduino. So next time you're in element14 getting your bits, say whether it be a Raspberry Pi or some other stuff, do also consider that this is only the beginning of an adventure. There's a lot of possibilities that the Raspberry Pis open up to you, and in order to make the most of all of the possibilities, you may need to buy things like the PiFace Digital or the Gertboard to interface it with your regular electronics. Or maybe even consider things like the PiFace Control and Display, which allows you to have a LCD front panel and push button interface, and also IR remote reception, which could be quite useful for XBMC, but this all takes time to explore. It takes some work to do the coding. So I suppose if you're interested in coding and you've got some time on your hands, this is probably a worthwhile venture. You might teach yourself something about programming. So yeah, it's a great kit. I think you'll enjoy it whether you want to use it as a media center or not. But for those who are just getting started with the Raspberry Pi provides a good opportunity to have everything in the one kit at a price which, let's just say, you won't save much money if you were to run around and get each part separately. I'd just like to thank element14 for supporting the community and providing the kit for test today. I'm Gough for element14 RoadTests.